did what the Pilgrims did under the tyranny of British rule, what European Jews did under the spread of Nazism, what the Irish did during the potato famine, what the landless in Russia, China, and places all over the world did when they felt that a better life was waiting for them across a border or an ocean. And what binds these stories together makes them, and what makes them universal, was the hope for something better. So to leave, migrants had to draw on their inner reserves and had to depend on networks of knowledge about the North. Black railroad workers, the Pullman porters, employed by the Illinois Central and other railroads, brought stories, handbills, and newspapers such as the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier to Southern readers. The Pullman porters were known as the Grapevine Telegraph, and they distributed newspapers as well as rumors about the North and employment opportunities, and created circuits of information. Robert Abbott, the editor of the Chicago Defender, seeing the possibility of racial advancement and a larger readership for his journal, used biblical imagery of an Egyptian-style exodus and a promised land to promote the advantages of black life in the North. Now, to get a better sense of, and then here's the Defender kind of covering the migration and talking about migrants still leaving the South. To get a better sense of some of the reasons, the more specific reasons why migrants left, let's take a look at some of the letters that migrants wrote. These letters were forwarded to the Chicago Defender, and from these letters we can really see how very carefully executed the migrants' plans were. We can see the ways that migrants created meticulous links and reached out to chains of kin, neighbors, and friends who would guide and support them. They also sought help from public agencies, social welfare organizations, newspaper editors, and employers in an effort to glean information from a wide variety of sources. So let's just take a look at these two. Maybe I could ask for two volunteers who could read these two letters written in 1917 that were forwarded to the Chicago Defender. Okay, thank you. And maybe one other volunteer would like to read? Okay.
Dear sir, I saw your advice in the Chicago Defender. I thought to write for further information. I would be glad to know how I can get there. I am a labor man, want to get where work is plentiful and good wages. I want to get in a Christian nice place. I have a good family and care for them. I want to come up there to see the place and then later on send for family. Can you send for me or describe me to someone who will send for me?
Thank you. Thank you.
Dear sir, I would like for you to write me and tell me how is time up there and jobs is to get. I would like for you to get me a job and my wife. She is a #1 good cook, maid, nurse, job. I am a firing boiler, steam fitter, and experiences mechanics, help, and will do laboring work. If you cannot get me one of all those jobs above that I can do. I have worked in a foundry as a molder helper and has lots of experience at that. I am 27 years of age. If you can get me a job, I would like for you to do so, please, and let me know, and will pay for trouble. If you knew of any firm that needs a man, give them my address, please. I want to get out of the South where I can demand something for my work.
So thank you. So I think these letters help us to see how, what a carefully conceived decision this was to move. It wasn't just that people just got up and left, but rather they were writing to the Defender, they were writing to social service agencies, they were explaining the talents and the resources that they had themselves and the when they decided to move to the north. So now let's talk a little bit about what life was like for these migrants when they arrived, and particularly what were their initial encounters with their new northern environments. And here I'm going to ask for a few volunteers as well. So this is a report from 1922 about a migrant family who's adjusting to Chicago. And it gives us a good sense of, you know, what they enjoyed about Chicago, but then also some of what they missed about the South. So could I ask for 3 volunteers to read this? 1, 2, 3, and 3. Thank you.
Okay. Doing one paragraph?
Sure,
I see.
that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
The wife thinks that northern Negroes have better manners but are not as friendly as the colored people in the South. She says people do not visit each other and one is never invited to dine at a friend's house. She thinks they cannot afford it with food so high. She thinks people were better in the South than they are here and says that they had to be good there for they had nothing else to do but go to church.
She feels a greater freedom here because of the right to vote, the better treatment afforded by white people, the lack of Jim Crow laws. She likes the North because of the protection afforded by the law and the better working conditions. You don't have an overseer always standing over you, Shilmar.
Some colored people have come up here and forgotten to stay close to God. Hence, they have gone to destruction. She hopes that an equal chance in industry will be given to all, that more houses will be provided for the people, and rent will be charged for the work of the house, and the cost of living generally will be reduced. She does not expect to return to Georgia and is advising friends to come to Chicago.
Great, thank you. So here again, we see that this is a very complicated decision. It was a very carefully executed decision. And then once people arrived, there were mixed feelings. You know, it wasn't just that the North was this haven that they expected, even though there were greater opportunities. They missed some elements of the South. You know, and I think this is particularly interesting that, you know, people had to be good in the South because all there was to go to church. You know, and then when they get to the North, now there's all these new kinds of activities and nightlife and things like that, which we'll talk about. So let's come back to our native Richard Wright and hear about his first encounter with Chicago and how he experienced Chicago when he arrived. So can I ask for 4 more volunteers to read his discussion, his reflections on arriving in Chicago? Maybe, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we'll just start and have each volunteer maybe do a page, and I'll change the pages.
My first glimpse of the flat, black stretches of Chicago depressed and dismayed me, mocked all my fantasies. Chicago seemed an unreal city whose mythical houses were built of slabs of black coal, wreathed in piles of gray smoke, houses where foundations were sinking slowly into the dank prairie. Flashes of steam showed intermittently on the wide horizon, gleaming translucently in the wind.
What would happen to me here? Would I survive? My expectations were modest. I wanted only a job. Hunger had long been my daily companion. Diversion and recreation, with the exception of reading, were unknown. In all my life, though surrounded by many people, I had not had a single satisfying, sustained relationship with another human being, and not having had any, I did not miss it.
The train drove into the depot. Aunt Maggie and I got off and walked slowly through the crowds into the station. I looked about to see if there were signs saying for white, for colored. I saw none. Black people and white people moved about, each seemingly intent upon his private mission. There was no racial fear. It was strange to pause before a crowded newsstand and buy a newspaper without having to wait until a white man was served. And yet, I began to grow tense again, although it was a different sort of tension that I had known before.
The streetcar came. Aunt Maggie motioned for me to get on and pushed me toward a seat in which a white man sat looking blankly out the window. I sat down beside the man and looked straight ahead of me. After a moment, I stole a glance at the white man out of the corner of my eyes. He was still staring out the window, his mind fastened upon some inward thought. I did not exist for him. I was as far from his mind as the stone buildings that swept past in the street. It would have been illegal for me to sit beside him in the part of the South that I had come from. The white man who sat beside me rose, and I turned my knees aside to let him pass. And another white man sat beside me and buried his face in a newspaper. How could that possibly be? Was he conscious of my blackness?
So how would you kind of summarize Richard Wright's experience, this initial encounter with Chicago? Loneliness?
Disappointment.
Disappointment?
But not only that, it seemed to me that, maybe even unconsciously, but I guess he wrote it, he was aware of it, that he was evaluating his environment. Once he got there, comparing what he had experienced in the South initially, well, once he got to the North, he started looking at the different kinds of things that he would see in the South that was degrading or discriminatory